I'm just going to talk about secret aircraft, because if you tell people that the United States are developing aircraft in secret and they've got phenomenal capabilities and they can go really fast, most people will say, well, of course they develop aircraft in secret. That's their job. They do it to protect us. But if you were to say to that person, they've developed triangular craft which are 10 times the size of this room, along each side, 600 feet. They can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally, so they can get into space in 40 seconds from a standing start. They're silent. They can get to the moon in a couple of hours, and they can get to Mars in a few weeks. And they can traverse the solar system. They can land them on the moon or neighbouring planets and use them as bases. And they've weaponized them, and they've got them in orbit in various places. And they've been used to monitor the planet and possibly look down on us and with various different types of weapons, pick out particular countries or people. Now, would you still say the same? That you're not bothered that the US are developing secret craft if they've got that kind of capability? I think we have the right to know about it, because I think that is what is going on. And it comes from the disclosures of someone called Ed Fouché. Now, this is Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson and I recorded a TV show all about the disclosures of Ed Fouché. Now, Ed Fouché came out in 1998. He's an avionics engineer. He worked with various people on secret projects who gave him information about this particular space vehicle. Right? It's 600 feet along each side. It doesn't need wings to fly. It has what's called a magnetic field disruptor, which is powered by a plasma accelerator. And I'm going to come on and I'm going to explain how this plasma accelerator creates a magnetic vortex field around the craft, which somehow disrupts the force of gravity. All right? Because most physicists will agree that at some level electromagnetism and gravity are connected, and that you can affect gravity with electromagnetics. Now, when we've put this interview out, because Andrew's done over 6 hours of interviews with Edgar Fouché, right? They're all on his website if you want to go and watch them, right? After we put that, and it was on national TV, various trolls on the internet started trying to debunk Edgar Fouché. And I had emails from viewers saying, Richard, why are you covering Ed Fouché in the TR3B? He's a liar, he's a proven liar, and he's forged one of his documents. Well, I would point you to this document written by Andrew Johnson entitled The TR3B Trolls and the Truth. Because the two people who have been trying to discredit Ed Fouché, David Hilton and a guy called Jeremy Riss, who goes by the name of Alien Scientist on the internet, Andrew suspects are government agents. And you would need to read this detailed document to understand how they have gone about trying to trash Ed Fouché's claims. Now, either one of two things is true. Either Fouché is a liar and these guys are right, or Fouché is a very important whistleblower and they're trying to trash his work because they want this leak in their secrecy plugged. And I suspect it's the latter. All right? One of them has got a criminal record and links to another disinformation organisation. But this lecture is not about this argument which is going on the internet about Ed Fouché. All right? They filmed him on Skype without his knowledge when he'd had a drink, and they were trying to put words in his mouth and this kind of thing. But I suspect that this has been done as a result of my TV show, because David Hilton actually took an extract from the TV show, and then he showed how Fouché is supposed to have forged a document. But Fouché completely refutes that he's forged any of his documents, and he's got hundreds of documents. So this is Fouché, in the US Air Force for many years, and as I say, worked on lots of different secret projects, and he worked at Area 51, the infamous Area 51. All right, now I'm going to go into some of the details of this secret aerial vehicle, triangular vehicle, and you'll notice there on this particular drawing, or this diagram, that it was like a kind of a purpley colour. Well, Fouché claims that they have a coating of quasi-crystals which can change their radar absorptiveness, and they can change their colour. So if you were to see one of these things, it would be blending in with the sky. So if you've seen it at night, it's going to be black. All right? If you've seen it during the day, it's going to be the same colour as the sky. And quasi-crystals, which Fouché spoke about in 1998, There's a guy recently just got the Nobel Prize for physics or chemistry in quasi-crystals. So he's talking about things before they've been released into the white world. And there are other reasons why I suspect Fouché is a genuine whistleblower, which I'm going to come on to. But before I do that, I'm just going to show you some evidence which backs up Ed Fouché's claims that people who've seen these 600 feet along one side triangular vehicles that are silent, they've been seen all over the place. In 1988, a wave known as the Staffordshire Flap occurred at Cannock Chase. In March 1997, the Sheffield UFO incident took place.
We had 52 flying triangle incidents over Derby.
It took shape. It was a triangle, a big huge triangle with the lights all the way around the edge, and it went over my flat.
What I noticed is it was sort of rotating like that.
I saw this massive, great big black triangle sitting in there. A huge black triangular object.
I realised it was this black triangular shaped object.
It's the size of it's massive, like a great big football field.
It must have been at least a football field in size.
Almost the size of a football pitch.
The size of 3 football pitches.
Just added off.
Right.
But there were no sound at all.
I could see then it was a triangle.
It was absolutely massive. And in the centre was a small cluster of red and orange, like honeycomb arrangement of lights.
And there was one red one in the centre.
One silent.
A light at each corner and the big light in the middle.
Pretty much dead on what I saw, to be honest.
And it was at this point that the triangle tilted up in the air, but it rose, like I say, like a submarine underwater.
It travelled fast and, most strangely, was completely silent. Overall dimensions approximately the size of a football pitch.
And it actually came down in the road and hovered about 10 foot, stood there staring at it.
Now, these statements are all from a film I made last year called Almost Identified Flying Objects. And also in that film, I've reported on the Belgian UFO flap of 1990. And in the film, we've screened some video of Professor Emil Schweitzer, because the Belgian Air Force actually chased some of these triangles that were appearing in the skies over Belgium, and they captured them on radar. So the radar data was given to Belgium's top radar expert. He examined the data. He said, yes, they're definitely real objects, and we can't understand how they're performing these particular manoeuvres. And it was a bit of a scoop to get this particular footage of Professor Emil Schweitzer from David Caton, who got it from researcher Harry Harris. Another wave of black triangles appeared in Belgium in 1990. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 fighters to try and intercept them, but were outmanoeuvred every time. After days of activity, the Belgian Air Force had no explanation, and to this day still have no explanation as to the origin of the triangular UFOs. After the events, an investigation was launched, and the airborne radar tips from the F-16s were given to radar expert Professor Emil Schweitzer. Schweitzer ruled out any form of radar anomaly and concluded the radar systems were tracking real objects. Calculations were carried out on the data, and in one manoeuvre the triangular craft turned a sharp corner, resulting in an acceleration of 30 g. That's 30 times greater than the Earth's gravity. This would be impossible for a conventional aircraft, and any occupants would be dead. Incredibly, in 1991, Schweitzer was asked by the British Ministry of Defence to come over to the UK to give British military chiefs a briefing on the movements of this unknown craft and explain the radar data. We know this because Schweitzer himself told researcher Harry Harris when Harris managed to get an interview with him in his hotel whilst in the UK.
What I found by calculations starting from the data recorded by the pilot, that the UFO made at one point of his trajectory a very strange motion, and during that very strange motion the normal acceleration was, let's say, above 30 Gs. Yes. So the trajectory was, first of all, the UFO was flying almost level, and then suddenly made a 90-degree motion. At that point, where he made a 90-degree turn, that point, the normal acceleration was above 30 Gs. Climbed almost vertically, and then descended obliquely to the ground. During the oblique descent, the UFO was flying supersonic.
Is it reasonable to assume that there couldn't have been anything living in that machine, that UFO, as we understand life?
I would say that with the present human technology, that's impossible.
So you said, with present human technology, that would be impossible. I would change that. With present disclosed human technology, that would be impossible. Because I suspect that what we were seeing in the 1990 Belgian UFO flap was some version or other of the TR-3B. That's not to say that UFOs don't exist, because I think they do. And I'm going to come on to that. Now, okay, so let's have a look at Ed Fouché talking now. In this next clip, he talks about two space stations which have been put in orbit above the Earth that the NSA have not told anyone about. They haven't told the American government about them. And he also speaks about two different methods that the NSA had in the 1990s to go to and from these two particular satellites. One method was using the TR-3B, which I'm going to come on to. The other method was to use two conventional aircrafts, one on top of the other, the SR-75 and the SR-74. SR-74 would go on top of the SR-75. It would take off from a normal runway. It would go to a very high altitude and then would release the SR-74. The SR-74 could then actually get into space and go to these two space stations that they've not told anyone about. All right? But the SR-74 was not able to take off from the ground, so they needed the two conventional type aircraft with wings and jet engines to get this thing in orbit. So they don't need a space shuttle in order to get into orbit. And the TR-3B was the other vehicle that they were using to get into space.
Now, the NASA space shuttle, I'm here to tell you, is really an antique by comparison. The joke is on us. If you think these rumors are far-fetched, look at the YB-49 and the XB-70, flown in 1948 and 1964, respectively. Now look at the SR-75, which has been spotted numerous times. You say the government can't keep a secret? Boy, you're wrong. From my sources, two new vehicles have been placed in permanent orbit. One of these vehicles is the Space Orbital Nuclear Service Intercept Vehicle, SunCiv. When you hear it from another reliable source in 10 years, you'll remember this. It's codenamed Locust. The SR-74 and the TR-3B flying triangle can deliver spares, replacement units, service fuels, chemicals, and modules to the SunCiv, or Locust. The robotic SunCiv uses deliverables to service, calibrate, repair, and replace parts on the newer NSA, CIA, and NRO Ferret satellites. And I know for a fact that they were developing robotic repair of electronics equipment as far back as '81, because I worked a program to where they didn't want technicians looking at the equipment.
So this is in 1998, he's saying all this, and he's not really being given a platform to air these particular disclosures. Right, now, I mentioned before that the craft uses what's called a plasma accelerator. And this is what I think it would look like if we were to look inside it. So we're looking at it, let's say if we go over the prototype one, which was 200 feet along each side, you're looking at a 100 feet diameter tube, which is about 10 feet across. So you could probably walk around this structure inside there when it's powered down. In there, they fill it with a mercury-based plasma, which is a gas which has become ionized. Pressurize it to 150,000 atmospheres, which is extremely high pressure, or in the operational models, 250,000 atmospheres, and it's then spun around in a circle at 40,000 revolutions per minute, so 40,000 RPM. Right? So what you've got in a plasma, you've got charged particles, and you've got them going around very, very, very fast in a circle. Now, a charged particle which moves creates a magnetic field. If you have charge flowing in that direction, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it in that direction. So what you're going to get a magnetic field enveloping the whole craft of some phenomenal strength, which I'm going to come on to. Ed describes it as a magnetic vortex field. Now, the thing that enabled them to develop these plasma accelerators, allegedly, is the material that the device was made from, the thing that's withstanding this massive pressure. And he describes it as a foil-like material as thin as a plastic bag, which you can't cut with a knife. And they used 12 layers of it in this plasma accelerator. And this is what he talks about in this next clip.
Another friend who worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth described a program in which he worked a plasma accelerator in the mid-60s, researching gravity warping techniques. He is a physicist by education and trade. This was his first top-secret program. He described a foil-like material, much like that discovered after Roswell crash. He described the foil as 12 layers of material less than 10,000ths of an inch thick. It was as flexible as a plastic trash bag, but virtually indestructible to piercing, burning, or cutting, which you've probably all heard before. Here's what you haven't heard. In order to cut the material used for the project, the material was supercooled, a large electrical charge was applied to polarize the molecular structure, and a laser cutter was applied in order to cut this material. Large ribbons of this material were used to reinforce the accelerator, which contained the mercury-based plasma that they started researching in 1965. The plasma was cooled to superconductive temperatures, rotated at 45,000 revolutions per minute, and pressurized at 150,000 atmospheres. This would be considered state-of-the-art technology even today.
All right. Now, in the next clip, he describes some of the characteristics of the craft, because they've made this plasma accelerator, they've got it to actually reduce its own weight. This magnetic vortex field is affecting the gravitational field around it, and is also presumably reducing inertial forces if the thing changes direction. So it's reducing its own mass. This is physics which is not in the white world. Anyway, he describes the characteristics in this next clip.
It was 200 feet across, the prototype. The Tactical Reconnaissance TR-3B first flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped, nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program. By 1994, there were $3 billion-plus operational models. The operational model is 600 feet across. This flying triangle is not fiction. If you don't believe me, ask the tens of thousands of people who have now spotted one version or another of it, from Belgium to England. Ken can tell you about people that have seen England to Arizona. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. The circular plasma field accelerator ring, called the magnetic field disruptor, surrounds a rotatable crew compartment. It's far ahead of anything you've ever imagined as far as technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed a reverse engineered MFD, and I believe the government will go at any lengths to protect this technology. The plasma in this accelerator is mercury-based. It's pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin, superconductivity, and accelerated to 60,000 revolutions per minute to create a superconductive plasma with the resulting gravity energy. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts and neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. This causes the effect of making the aircraft extremely light and able to outperform any aircraft yet constructed. TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with indefinite loiter time. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. With the vehicle's mass reduced by 89%, the vehicle can travel at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally. So for those that have had sightings of things making right, and they're not perfect right turns, obviously. Nothing can make a perfect right turn. It's against the laws of physics. But it sure looks like a right turn at a distance.
So what he's saying is that the field generated by this plasma accelerator reduces the weight of the whole thing by 89%. So let's say you weigh 10 stone. If you stood in the middle, you weigh 1 stone. All right? And the whole craft's weight is reduced. Now, let's ask the question, does this seem plausible? Is there anything in our physics textbooks that we can verify this with and say, well, is he telling us the truth? Well, here's a science paper from 2010 entitled Generating a Magnetic Field by a Rotating Plasma, 12 years after Fouché's initial disclosures. So yes, it is possible to generate a magnetic field by rotating a plasma. But is it possible to use a magnetic field for propulsion? The Lorentz force is the magnetic force in physics. So in electric motors, you have two components which you pass electricity through. Each produces a magnetic field, and it's the force between those fields that turns your electric motor, your lawnmower, your washing machine, what have you. But can you use that force to make something float off the ground? It's not that easy, because the Lorentz force requires two components, one which pushes the other apart. So if you try to use it for propulsion, the component which is being pushed upwards will leave the thing that's pushing it. So it's a bit like trying to lift yourself up off a chair and float in midair. You can't do it. But according to Fouché, if you get the magnetic field strong enough and in this configuration of a magnetic vortex field, I would imagine it's something the shape of, because every magnetic field has a shape, it has topology, right? So the shape would be something like water going down a plug hole. And I suspect it requires a field which is of immense strength before it starts to affect gravity. And I'm going to come on to that now. Let's just ask the question, if we were able to rotate a plasma at 40,000 RPM, as Ed Fouché claims, what would the strength of the magnetic field? Now we can ask that question by comparing it to electricity in a wire. When you pass electricity down a wire, you get a magnetic field at 90 degrees to it, going around that wire. The further away from the wire, the weaker the field. All right? Now you can put your wire in a circle and allow your electrons to flow around in a circle, very similar to the TR3B. So you've got charged particles going around in a circle, just like the plasma accelerator. And it produces a magnetic field this shape, all the way around the ring. So it's something like that that the TR3 is going to be generating. So B here is the magnetic field strength measured in Tesla. The equation for magnetic field strength for a charged particle flowing in a direction is given by this equation here. Mu naught over 4 pi times QV over R squared. Don't get frightened by that. It's not as complicated as you might think. Mu naught over 4 pi is a constant. Okay, so we can pretty much forget about that term. R is the distance from the charged particle to where you're measuring the field, right? So all this term means is the further away you get, the smaller the field. So we can forget that term. The two important terms is V, that's the velocity of your charge, the speed of your electrons, and Q, the number of electrons, how much charge is there. So in a copper wire with DC current flowing down it, electrons flow at 0.735 millimeters per second. Electrons will flow at 0.7 of a millimeter in 1 second. That's how fast electrons go down the wire, right? Now let's compare that speed, V, with a plasma in Fouché's accelerator. He said it was 100 feet in diameter, and he said it was going around at 40,000 RPM. That comes out at a speed of 64,000 meters per second compared to 0.0000735 meters per second. So the plasma, or the charged particles in the plasma accelerator, are traveling 87 million times faster than the electrons in a copper wire. So if the other factors in this equation were the same, it means that B, the magnetic field strength, is going to be 87 million times that of the field produced by a wire. Now let's look at the other term. So do we have the same amount of charge in a plasma though? Well, the charge in copper, or the electron density, is 8.4 times 10 to the 22 electrons in every cubic centimeter of copper. How does that compare with a plasma? Well, the electron density in a plasma depends on the type of plasma, and it depends on the temperature. But looking at this graph, if we just look at the electron density of 10 to the 22 here, right, we see that metals, or metal plasmas, exist at about, in other words, supercooled. Fouché said that the plasma accelerator was cooled to 150 degrees Kelvin. That's about minus 120 odd centigrade. So this is all making sense to me. The electron density of metals, because this was a metal-based plasma, it's a mercury-based plasma, supercooled, would produce a similar electron density to that of copper. So that's why they've probably got to supercool it, so that the plasma can obtain that particular electron density. So from those figures, I would suggest that the magnetic field strength using this plasma would be thousands of times higher than using wire and copper. Sorry, using wire and electricity. Now, this table here shows typical magnetic field strengths, fixed magnetic field strengths, because you can have pulsed magnetic fields, but I think we're talking about fixed magnetic fields. If you've got something going around in a circle at a fixed speed, the field is going to be fixed. It's not going to be pulsed. So a typical magnetic field in a power transformer is between 1 and 2 Tesla. Tesla is the unit of magnetic field strength. I particularly like this one. 16 Tesla is the magnetic field strength used to levitate a frog. Right, but the strongest magnetic field ever produced in a laboratory, this is a fixed magnetic field, not a pulsed one, ever produced in a laboratory is 45 Tesla. And that's it. So I think they're producing fields with the TR3B of thousands of Tesla. So there's no physicist can stand here and say to me, well, if you get a magnetic vortex field of, say, 10,000 Tesla, it will not affect gravity. They can't say that because they've never produced one in a laboratory. And the reason why they've never produced one in a laboratory is because they haven't got the materials that they used in that TR3B plasma accelerator. So has Ed Fouché taken all of this into account when he's made up his story? I don't think so. Now, they have produced pulsed magnetic fields in the order of thousands of Tesla, a few thousand Tesla, but they've blown the laboratory up. Because with a pulsed magnetic field, you get voltages induced, and they just blow everything up. But a fixed magnetic field, I think, is what we're talking about. So this is all adding up to me. And just to reiterate, no scientist can say to you that if you had a fixed magnetic vortex field of, let's say, 10,000 Tesla, that it wouldn't suddenly interrupt gravity, because they've never done it in a lab. Okay? Now, Ed said that these craft were capable of Mach 9, that's 6,900 miles per hour, not just horizontally, but vertically. At that speed, from a standing start, you'd be in space in 40 seconds. A 600 feet triangle in space, in orbit in 40 seconds. And we were all shown the space shuttle on TV. 10, 9, 8, 7. It is a big, big con. Now, if we imagine that they've increased this capability, because we're talking about 1990 here, these capabilities. Let's say they've increased the capability by tenfold. You're talking 70,000 miles per hour, right? That would take you under 4 hours to get to the moon, and it would take you just 3 weeks to get to Mars. Now, if you've got a 600 feet platform that you can get to the moon in a few hours, you can put it on the surface of the moon, use it as a base, take it to Mars, take it to any planet in the solar system. Do you think that they're not going to do that? Or do you think they're just going to put it in a cupboard and let it gather dust? I think they've been there and they've got the T-shirt. One person who made claims about this in 1998 was a guy called William Hamilton.
This colonel is a real warrior type guy, and he had a degree in plasma physics. And he was also a consultant to NASA, and he was a consultant to people out at the Palos Verdes nuclear power generating station just 50 miles west of Phoenix. The other thing he said was there was a base on the moon. I find that quite astounding. I mean,